Hi, have you ever offered God's story through you back to God? Well, I grew up in a poor family in the mountains of North Carolina, and the story goes that a little country church had a bus ministry, and they would use their bus to pick up children and families living in the rural area and bring them to church. Well, one Sunday, the bus picked up a little boy named Timmy. Apparently, Timmy had never been to church. His clothes were torn and dirty. His face was not washed. His hair was not combed. But Timmy was welcomed into the church, and he sat on a row with some of the regular attendees. Well, Timmy was observant to each and everything that was happening, and he watched as some men carried some bowls from the back of the church to the front of the church. And he was very curious as they prayed over the bowls and then turned around and started passing the bowl person to person down the aisle. Well, Timmy became very restless because he noticed that a person would take the bowl, put some money into it, and pass it on. And then the next person would take the bowl, put some money into it, and pass it on. And Timmy was very restless because he had no money. And so he just watched as the bowl was passed from aisle to aisle, and eventually the man with the bowl was at Timmy's aisle. And he passed it to the person beside Timmy, who took the bowl, put some money in it, and tried to pass it around Timmy. Well, Timmy grabbed the bowl. Everyone in the church was suspicious that this poor little bus kid was about to steal part of their Sunday's offering. Timmy stood up and took the bowl to the aisle. Everyone's watching Timmy. And Timmy put the bowl down in the floor. And he looked at the cross behind the pastor sitting at the front of the church. And he said, "God, I don't have any money to give you today." And Timmy stepped into the bowl. And he looked at the cross and he said, "God, I give you me." Well, needless to say, there was not a dry eye in the church that day. God had used this poor little bus kid to show everyone in the church the offering that God is looking for. It was December the 8th, 2019, when I made a similar offering to God. I had been saved whenever I was 10 years old. I was called into the ministry when I was 17, and I'd been serving God faithfully all my life for decades. God has been so faithful, loving, and kind. But in the fall of 2019, I began sensing a stirring in my heart that God wanted me to tell His story through me. He wanted me to write. He was calling me to write a book. And I remember really having to wrestle it out. I had given my life to God, but I'd never really given His story through me to God. And it forced me to risk rejection and exposure and a lot of different things that I wasn't necessarily wanting. But I remember that Sunday that I surrendered all to God in a very similar time of taking up the offering. I was standing in the back of the church, my face riddled with tears as I remember just saying, "God, I give you me." Have you ever offered God's story through you back to God? Well, it was 2020 when I wrote and published my first book, and it became an instant international bestseller. In 2021, I wrote and published my second book, and it too became an instant international bestseller. Every day, I am honored and sobered as I hear from people around the world how God is using my books to build their faith and encourage them in their faith. Well, I have just finished writing my third book in 3 years. I know the pleasure of being able to declare it is finished. And I would love the opportunity to work with you, coach you as you write your first or your next book. I made so many mistakes, and I wish I would have had the 7 steps to telling your story. A free PDF I have prepared for writers around the world. I have prepared for you. You can go to spiritmedia.us/7 and request your free download of 7 steps to telling your story. It will help you to avoid the intimidation of starting to write and the doubts that come along the way. And it will build your confidence as you take these 7 steps that God can use His story through you to the nations. I would love the opportunity to invite you to join the Writers Club with Kevin White. It begins by you downloading the 7 steps to telling your story. Go to spiritmedia.us/7 and request your free copy today.